Hello again, Sat J here. Basically, I'm going to talk about in this little video about basically the philosophy of caffeinism, what caffeinism is, what caffeinism is not, and hopefully that can clear up some stuff if anybody is new to the philosophy. A lot of people might even be followers of it right now and they just don't even know it. Think about it. For thousands and thousands of years, caffeine has helped people. Caffeine has woken people up. It has helped others achieve enlightenment. And that's all that we are trying to do. That's all that we are trying to get across as far as the message goes. That's pretty much it. We live by the healing powers of caffeine. Caffeine wakes us up. Caffeine helps us focus. Caffeine helps our performance. It helps in a myriad of ways and fashions. It helps people in the fitness industry. It can help people who can't just seem to focus and get their various assignments that they're doing in order. It helps anybody. It doesn't matter who you are. And this little video right here, as I said in the intro, is going to be the first in a series of videos talking about each chapter. And when I say each chapter, I mean each letter in the written text here. So the text I have here that we follow is called the Written Brew, and it is the text of the Brewed Awakening. And I'm credited with writing it, but I will say that not everything in this came from me. There have been suggestions that I add to it from various other followers of the philosophy, people that I've never even met before that have shared their wisdom on the internet, either by comedy or by memes. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to flip to the first letter here. And the first letter here, this is terms to know, okay? So basically there's 3 terms that you are to familiarize yourself with should you try to pursue caffeinism. So basically the first is, it's a noun. It is called the caffeinist. Basically it's the word caffeine with the suffix "ist" on the end of it. It's a noun. There's 2 definitions here. One, who endorses the use of or lives by the healing powers of caffeine. 2, an active or inactive member within the caffeinic temple. Now originally, before we became the Brewed Awakening, we had, there were 2 other names. But the thing is that both of those names were taken on social media. And so I wrote this basically in mind that we are a philosophical and or religious group, but we were known then as the Caffeinic Temple. But I've seen that those names were taken, as I just said, and so now we are the Brewed Awakening. So basically a caffeinist is somebody who represents their love for caffeine and all things caffeine related. It doesn't matter if it's coffee, it doesn't matter if it's sweet tea. It can even be prescription drugs for whatever reason. Basically, you represent the caffeinic philosophy, which brings us to the next definition. The next term to know, we have caffeinic. This is an adjective. We have only one here. It says it describes a noun by its correlation to caffeine or the caffeinic temple or members thereof. I'm going to get into this, but first, real quick, I just want to say a note that, again, the caffeinic temple is not what we are. If anything, you could compare it to a bunch of different denominations, like say in Christianity or Islam, perhaps. Like in Christianity, you've got Presbyterian Church, you've got Seventh-day Adventists, you've got Day 3 Church, you've got Baptist churches. So basically, the Brewed Awakening is the name of our group, and the Caffeinic Temple is, if it was a physical place, you could say that it is just the name of a place that houses Brewed Awakening members. But anyway, back to the definition of this. Caffeinic describes a noun by its correlation to caffeine or the Caffeinic Temple or members thereof. So basically, it's anything that has caffeine in it. It could be a soda, it could be a coffee, it could even be a glass of sweet tea. This term came from describing it. This is a caffeinic beverage. As an example, this drink is rather caffeinic, meaning this drink has a lot of caffeine. Or this drink is a little bit caffeinic, meaning it has little caffeine. The third and final text that you need to familiarize yourself with is, it's a noun. It's the name of the philosophy. It's Caffeinism. Caffeinism is the philosophy of a person adhering to caffeinic practices. Now, what is caffeinic practice? I'll actually address that in a different video, because in the text here, there is a book dedicated to caffeinic practice. But basically, there is a note, as I said, it's also followed as a religion, but it need not be required. You can just live by this, because caffeine is a tool. If you are the religious type, you could say that we are blessed by it, but if not, you could say that it is a great tool that we use. But Caffeinism is the philosophy of a person adhering to caffeinic practices. This does not mean that you need to be a member of the Brood Awakening to participate in caffeinic practices, or to live or think on the philosophy of Caffeinism. I hope that has cleared up some stuff. I hope, if anything, it has enlightened you, even just a fraction of how much caffeine possibly will. So stay tuned for the next chapter.